Welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and today we got to talk about this debate/conversation that happened on the Hill Rising channel between Jessica Burbank, a favorite of the actual Justice Warrior channel. From my community to Jessica, we absolutely love your horrible takes, and this was related to the DeSantis Newsom debate, which I have to be perfectly honest, I did not watch in its entirety, and Jessica Burbank trying to rewrite history and defend Newsom's COVID policy while simultaneously claiming that DeSantis was too strict, even though Newsom's policy was absurdly strict. This crazy rewriting of history is something that we gotta document because it's the new leftist tactic. But before we do, I want to say thank you to everybody who signed up over on actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
And thank you to the podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform.
Later, DeSantis dragged the California governor over his handling of the state's homelessness problem.
So first and foremost, this needs to be said. It is something that you guys will all comment on, and that is the fact that Jessica Burbank, good-looking woman. I mean, this angle right here is definitely her most flattering angle. I am in support of it, and it's unfortunate that everything that she's going to say is ridiculous and absurd. Everything's out of context. It's all lies. It's all nonsense, because nice-looking girl. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying that if I didn't make commentary on it, you preverts out there in the audience definitely would, and you disgust me that you can't judge a woman by her ideas.
Let's stay on the topic of COVID for a second. I think it's kind of rich hearing DeSantis say this, because I remember moving to Florida at the very beginning of COVID. I stayed there for 2 months. And while every other state was open, restaurants were open, it was very easy to cross the border. There were no checks until I got to Florida. And then there were all of these white tents. They took my temperature through the window of the car. I had to fill out forms to promise that I didn't have COVID. It was a whole ordeal, very different from any other state. And most businesses were actually shut down.
So first and foremost, I gotta point out that this is a completely disingenuous and untrue point from Jessica Burbank, because during the COVID-19 pandemic, at the beginning, at the middle, and at the end, I was flying to different events across the country that I was doing, like for Myth Informed, like for Minds, and all of that. And when I came back to New York City each and every time, I had to present this form that had a whole bunch of things that allowed me to enter my own state. So no, this was just not Florida. On top of that, Jessica here, who was in favor of the COVID lockdowns, who was in favor of your business being shut down, who defended the teachers union, who were not backed up by any data at all whatsoever in their push to keep schools closed because they wanted to get paid while your kids' educational outcomes suffered, is now going after DeSantis for being too strict on COVID, even though in just a little bit of time, she is going to go after him for being too soft on COVID. So this is a completely disingenuous and ridiculous attack, and it's going to include a bunch of conspiratorial nonsense that we will get into a little bit later.
And then later on, DeSantis lying about the COVID deaths in the state of Florida. He's still facing legal action for this. The auditor found that he was underreporting COVID deaths by a significant amount, on some days saying there were none when there were 47 that day. But the data produced by the health department was not accurate. And so this legal action is going well into 2026. So I don't know if COVID is what Ron DeSantis really wants to be talking about here.
So you could actually hear the host of this show typing on the computer, looking up what Jessica is saying, and these fact checks in real time are going to be absolutely devastating for her. And the reason why is because she's actually citing the so-called whistleblower and actual scammer Rebecca Jones and her fraudulent reporting, and Jessica is going to double down and then triple down when it is brought up that this has been completely debunked. Jones has been shown to be an absolute fraudster, and by the way, even Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks actually had to produce a retraction for this because many left-wing people elevated this woman, told people to donate to her GoFundMe, and she turned out to be a complete and utter scam artist.
Yeah, I'll take your point that in the beginning Florida was locked down maybe just as much as other states. I would say that there's a fundamental difference though between saying that travelers from out of state should take their temperature versus keeping kids out of school for a year. I mean, one is obviously way worse than the other. The New York Times just published an article 2 weeks ago talking about the ramifications of keeping kids out of school, whether it's learning loss, mental health issues. There's been a rise in anxiety and depression among younger people. And so I just don't think those two things are comparable when it comes to a COVID restriction.
So I give credit to Amber right there. And by the way, I have no idea where this woman comes from on the political spectrum. I don't watch The Hill Rising all that often, but she shuts down the nonsense being put forward by Jessica Burbank right away by saying there's a fundamental difference between screening people entering your state, which by the way was not limited to just Florida despite Jessica Burbank's lie, and keeping kids out of school for a year in order to benefit the teachers union. Now they jump to the economy portion of the debate and DeSantis calling out Newsom for the fact that people are leaving California and more people are going into the state of Florida, and Jessica Burbank says some absolute objective nonsense about how California, which has twice the population of Florida, has an economy that's nearly twice the size of the economy of Florida, which makes sense based on their population numbers, so it doesn't really add anything to the conversation. But then we cut to the heart of the issue that the left has with Ron DeSantis, and that is that he's mean, he makes them feel bad, he makes Jessica feel bad, and because Jessica feels bad about Ron DeSantis, therefore you should feel bad because Ron DeSantis is a big fat meanie. Didn't you know he's a mean guy?
You know, Gavin Newsom talking about how Ron DeSantis demeans people, even with his COVID policy. As soon as the health department got data that the virus was disproportionately affecting working class people, people that had to sell coffees and work in warehouses and interact with other people on a daily basis, work that my parents do, he decided to open the state up, which signals to me that he finds working class people relatively expendable.
So right off the bat, you guys know objectively this is nonsense. The reason Ron DeSantis made the decision to open up the state of Florida is because he realized that based on the data, that COVID-19 was disproportionately affecting the elderly. So rather than shutting down the entire economy, what DeSantis tried to do was protect the people who were most vulnerable and then have everybody else make their own decisions about what precautions they want to take. But Jessica Burbank says that this is about attacking the working class people. Ron DeSantis hates the working class. Isn't he so mean? Even though this is not backed up by reality. And by the way, shutting down businesses, destroying small businesses hurts working class people much, much more than allowing people to make their own choices and assess their own level of risk. And again, just so you know, this is Burbank now backpedaling on her earlier position where she said DeSantis was too strict to saying that DeSantis was too soft on the lockdown. So whatever the question is for somebody who is as ideologically motivated as Burbank, the answer is Ron DeSantis bad, Ron DeSantis mean, Ron DeSantis evil.
He talked about Ron DeSantis demeaning the LGBTQ community. He says, you don't need to demean and humiliate people, Ron. You don't need to talk about people in this way. I think that's an important conversation to have because those are not qualities that I associate with a leader. You should be able to be an effective leader without having to say bad things about people. And Ron DeSantis, in my view, seems kind of childish in that respect. So I'm glad that came up.
So after Burbank lies about the working class thing and ignores the fact that DeSantis wanted to protect the elderly, and by the way, this is proven out by the data that was presented, at least in one clip that I saw of the Fox News debate, she then says DeSantis is mean to the alphabet people, he's mean to the gays, he's mean to the transes, and she gets asked a basic follow-up about this, and it is pretty funny to watch her try to respond to it because she really has no substance behind her.
What were some of the examples that you would give of DeSantis demeaning LGBTQ people?
I think his push for this bill in schools was a huge example of this, to equate, people dressing in drag as people who are perverted, who are trying to groom children. That's an awful thing to say about someone. To talk about the LGBTQ plus community in that way, I think is detrimental, especially if people are not fully aware of where that comes from, that there could be some data, that could be legitimate, that categorizing people who do drag, who dress up for fun and dance around are somehow the same people that are grooming children is just, I think, a really bad way to categorize a population of people.
So Burbank is very upset that Ron DeSantis had come out against drag performances in your K through 12 schools, in your public libraries, funded by the taxpayers for children. However, Amber is having none of that, and she's about to respond and completely eat Jessica Burbank's lunch.
The drag bill was related to drag performers who were doing it in front of children, though, and drag is necessarily an over-exaggerated, sexualized version of femininity. These drag performers do dress scantily clad. They have the very exaggerated makeup. And so I have quite a few friends in the LGBTQ community who have a problem with drag performances taking place in public libraries or otherwise in front of children. And so I think there's a fundamental difference between saying all drag performers are groomers versus, yes, people who dance provocatively in front of children are behaving inappropriately.
So I completely agree with Amber right here. I don't care what adults do. I don't care what the LGBTXXIIP does. I don't care about drag shows in any regard because I'm an adult. I think that if I don't like something, guess what? I don't gotta buy a ticket, I don't gotta attend it, I don't gotta watch that RuPaul show on whatever network it's on at this point in time, because I'm an adult and I'm capable of making my own decisions. However, these are sexualized performances. Honest people in the gays communities will admit that to you, and they're probably inappropriate for children. However, Jessica has a completely stupid and absurd response to it, an insane retort, and we're going to hear her put this forward only to see it be smacked down right in front of her face.
And on the parental rights and education bill,
at NFL games where there are cheerleaders that are dancing in a sexualized way, wearing barely any clothing, and it's like, welcome that children go to those games. I feel like that's the same thing.
I don't think that's the same thing at all.
So Jessica asserts that cheerleaders at NFL football games, those are just as sexual performances in front of the children's as drag shows in your public school, in your public library, being funded by the taxpayer. Now, this is ridiculous and absurd. Sure, you could say that some cheerleader uniforms are revealing, they don't cover a lot, but the performances put forward by cheerleaders are, first of all, they're shows of athleticism. Haven't you seen Bring It On, where they do the cheer competitions and whatnot? And number two, they're more about revving up and getting pep for the football team, or for the basketball team, or for the whatever team that we're referring to. The fact that cheerleaders tend to be attractive, especially at the professional NFL level, does not make them inherently sexual in the same way that a drag program, which is supposed to be inherently sexual, is.
But I would also say that on the parental rights and education bill, that what that bill is talking about is not in any way demeaning LGBTQ people. It's saying that between kindergarten and third grade, you should have developmentally appropriate conversations with those kids. And in Florida, it was found that 65 to 70% of voters agreed with the contents of that bill once they read it. The only time that they opposed the bill was when they read lies in the media about it, calling it the Don't Say Gay bill.
So Amber lays out the case for the Parental Rights and Education Act. She talks about how the majority of people in Florida actually supported it based on the text of the bill, and this is why the people in the media like Jessica Burbank had to lie about it in order to gin up a hysteria for people to be against it. Now, this fact, this truth being put forward to Jessica does not compute. She is going to respond, repeat herself as if she didn't hear it, because in her world, in her bubble, you say Ron DeSantis hates the gays, and that's the end of the conversation. So when Amber actually pushes forward, pushes back on her, there's nothing there. There's nothing beneath the surface. There's nothing for Jessica to actually respond to because she does not confront arguments outside of her own political bubble.
Is it also grooming when cheerleaders are dancing in, basically a bra and underwear at an NFL game or an NBA game? To me, it's not that different.
So right here, Jessica just doubles down on the cheerleaders are over-sexualized. She then tries to exaggerate and say that they're only in a bra and underwear. NFL cheerleaders are dressed like this. That is clearly a skirt. That is clearly a top. Is it a revealing top? Sure, but that is not the same thing as a bra and underwear that you would see at an over-sexualized drag performance. And by the way, she brings up the NBA, which just goes to show you she doesn't know anything about sports, because in most NBA teams, they have what are called spirit girls or whatever that aren't actually in your traditional cheerleader uniform. From the New York Knicks, I forget exactly what they're called, but I know spirit is somewhere in their name. They're dressed like this, a lot of times just wearing pants and a shirt. So this is in no way, shape, or form anywhere remotely close to a drag performance. And even in their other variants where they're wearing shorts, they often have the long sleeves. Also, they're called Knicks City Dancers, not called the Knicks Spirit Squad. Whoever made that mistake is an absolute idiot. But as you can see, the NBA is actually even more conservative than the NFL. And by the way, even the NFL has pivoted to shorts over skirts, and most people haven't even noticed the difference. And again, there's a difference in kind versus something that is set up for kids that is explicitly sexual versus a performance that happens during an NBA game that is supposed to raise pep, or an NFL game for that particular team. But Jessica doesn't want you to notice those delineations, so she's going to exaggerate and overemphasize the sexual nature of the cheerleaders to undercut the problems with these drag performances paid for by your tax dollars in the public schools.
You're dancing
The
to music.
cheerleaders in the
Drag
NFL
performers
have
are wearing
specific standards that they actually have specific standards for NFL cheerleaders such that their dancing is not overly provocative. And they actually fire cheerleaders who go out of their way to behave in a sexual manner during their job, and they're actually not even allowed to post certain content on social media that could be deemed unprofessional because of the fact that they are performing in a public setting.
So right there, Amber just walked up to Jessica Burbank and metaphorically slapped her right across the face. It turns out that cheerleaders for the NFL, specifically, and this is due to the fact that the NFL tries to be a family-friendly brand, have rules and regulations that prevent them from dancing in a super over-the-top sexual manner. On top of that, it goes even further. These cheerleaders are not allowed to have social media posts that are inappropriate because being a part of the cheerleading squad has a certain standard attached to it, and these standards are non-existent in the drag performances. So Jessica, your stupid point about the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders or whatever cheerleading team that you were talking about has been completely obliterated. But like we said before, new information cannot compute in Jessica Burbank's head, so watch her double down as if nothing was said at all in her direction on this bad talking point and say, oh my god, the cheerleaders, they're the biggest problems. Why aren't you against the NFL cheerleaders?
I've been to plenty of drag shows that are not sexual. There's way more sexual dancing at many NBA and NFL games than at many drag shows. And
so here we have Jessica saying, oh, I've been to so many drag shows that aren't sexual or anything like that. Trust me, bro, even though this whole thing is about exaggerated sexuality and everything like that, I've been to all of these unicorn drag shows that are totally child appropriate, but those NBA games, those NFL games, those cheerleaders, they're hoods on the field, and they discuss Jessica Burbank. Absolutely not. You got nothing. You got no retort. You have all these checks and policies in the NFL and in the NBA to prevent this behavior not only on the field, not only on the court, but off the court, and it does not compare to, again, taxpayer-funded drag shows.
At the end of the day, I think someone like Ron DeSantis, who wants to give parents more rights, shouldn't feel like it's his job to parent people's kids if they want to bring their kids to a drag show. Same as, the parents of kids who have a favorite football team are going to go to the game and they might see cheerleaders dancing and they might have a conversation about the over-sexualization of women's bodies, and that would be very good and healthy. But I think that's a decision that parents can very easily make.
Yeah, so the parental rights in education bill is so that parents can make those decisions, because one of the things that was happening, and by the way, I've documented this for years, is that they would have events like Drag Queen Story Hour in the public schools, which, by the way, Jessica Burbank would be in favor of. And then she's like, oh, just like you could take them to an NFL game, NBA game, really going after those cheerleaders. It seems like Jessica Burbank, although she has a very pretty face, might have been cut from a squad somewhere in her past, and saying, oh, that would be a conversation about the over-sexualization of women's bodies. We need to talk about that because these two things are the same thing, even though Amber has just systematically destroyed this talking point, taken it apart, shredded it, and thrown it back in her face.
His job is to make good pandemic policy, which he didn't do. Florida had an exorbitant amount of deaths, which he lied about.
So Jessica right here is a bit confused. She has not been able to compute this new information as it's being presented to her, so she pivots back to, oh my god, the pandemic deaths, he lied about them. I remember I heard that whistleblower say that Ron DeSantis lied about the deaths, even though she has been proven false time after time after time. But Amber is having none of that. She's laser focused, so she is about to blast Jessica in the face yet again.
Florida had the same COVID outcome in terms of deaths by population as California, despite having a much older population, which I think speaks to the success of his policies, even though they were deemed not restrictive enough by the public health bureaucracy.
So as presented in the Fox News debate, the deaths of Florida and California are nearly identical, despite the fact that Florida has one of the oldest populations in the union, and despite the fact that people like Jessica Burbank, who were criticizing DeSantis at the beginning of this for being too strict on lockdowns, actually are against the fact that he opened up. They sided with the teachers union. They sided against you. They didn't want your small business open. And the results were not that different from California, which had a bunch of other consequences, including an increase in excess deaths due to all the despair that was put forward by Newsom having all of these restrictive policies for so long.
We have all of the COVID data from Florida yet. That's what's going to come out from the appellate judge's case into 2024.
Right, but the audit that you're talking about found that all states had the same issue with early COVID reporting because they didn't have the databases set up in order to track this kind of data. And so you could argue perhaps that for the first 2 months, maybe people were making decisions based on incomplete information, but that's not a Florida exclusive problem. That was a national problem.
So again, Amber, I don't know what kind of fact-checking in real time thing that she actually has going on, nails Jessica to the wall on this, that the audit that she's referring to found the same problems across the country for the first couple of months of the pandemic. So again, Jessica Burbank is presenting absolute nonsense here, and she's actually going to pivot back to the whistleblower now to just show you how completely unaware of anything that's going on she actually is.
Well, the whistleblower claimed accurately after leaving the department that they were not reporting data.
If you're talking about Rebecca Jones, she didn't even have access to the data that she was talking about. She inflated her position and her case was struck down by a judge. She's separate from this audit you're talking about.
So what's funny about this is that Jessica can't even say Rebecca Jones's name, and she's saying, oh, the initial whistleblower, the one that was proven to be a fraudster. Again, even Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks, who does not like DeSantis, admitted that she didn't like DeSantis and she didn't care about the damage that it would have done to him back when she originally reported it, had to retract this story because it was so bad and so embarrassing. Yet Jessica doubles down on myth, fallacy, backtracks on her positions, and again is probably thinking about a way to attack cheerleaders for being just as sexual, she promises, as the sexually explicit drag performances. What you just witnessed right here is somebody who is capable of thought versus somebody who is trapped in their bubble, trapped in their echo chamber, not able to combat new information, not able to compute new information, and it was absolutely hilarious. Thank you to my buddy Clinton for sending me this clip. I enjoyed it thoroughly, but that's really all I have for you guys today. What did you think of this video? Did you like this video? If so, show me by leaving a like. Subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Jessica Burbank's utter nonsense. Till next time.